There is a hole right in the middle of my vegetable bed. Inside that hole sits a pipe. It is just a plain white PVC pipe sticking about 4 inches out of the ground, with a cheap plastic lid sitting on top. My neighbors are convinced I have lost my mind. My gardening friends eventually stopped asking questions. After the 3rd time, they saw me dropping banana peels into a sealed tube like I was performing some kind of strange burial ritual. But here is what none of them actually know. That ugly, unremarkable piece of plastic is quietly producing the most expensive fertilizer on Earth every single day, completely for free. And it is depositing it directly at the roots of my plants without me lifting a single finger. No turning compost piles in the suffocating July heat. No hauling heavy wheelbarrows full of rotting kitchen waste across the yard. No expensive spinning tumblers that cost $300 and break after 2 seasons. No foul odors wafting into the neighbor's open window. Just a pipe in the ground and a system so old, so elegant, and so brutally efficient that the modern garden industry has spent decades making absolutely certain you never hear about it. If you are exhausted from fighting your garden, if your back aches from turning piles of decaying leaves, and if you are ready to let nature do every single ounce of the heavy lifting, then, welcome. You have just discovered the Subterranean Worm Reactor. The modern world has convinced you that composting requires sacrifice. You must sacrifice a corner of your yard to an ugly black bin. You must sacrifice your Saturday mornings to the ritual of turning, mixing, aerating, and sweating under the sun. And then, after months of waiting and labor, you still have to shovel the finished compost out and wheelbarrow it back to the exact spot where your plants are actually growing. The entire process is a logistical nightmare designed to burn your calories and test your patience. But what if the entire system was broken by design? What if someone, long ago, figured out a way to let the earth do every single step invisibly, silently, underground on its own timeline without any intervention from you whatsoever? What if you could just feed the soil directly, right where the roots are already searching for food? This is not a new idea. It is actually one of the oldest agricultural secrets on the planet, and it was buried quite deliberately sometime around the middle of the 20th century. In the 1880s, a quiet, obsessive English scientist spent the last 40 years of his life hunched over glass containers, filled with dirt and worms. His name, Charles Darwin. While the world remembers him for the theory of evolution and the voyage of the Beagle, Darwin himself considered his final book to be one of the most important works of his entire career. That book was not about finches or fossils. It was about earthworms. Darwin proved, with meticulous scientific observation, that earthworms are the primary architects of all fertile soil on this planet. Not rain, which washes nutrients away, not sunlight, which merely provides energy. Worms. They are the silent engineers, churning the underworld, digesting organic matter, and excreting the very substance that makes forests grow and crops flourish. He calculated that the worms in a single acre of English farmland could process over 10 tons of soil per year, passing it through their bodies and transforming it into something entirely new. That knowledge did not disappear. It was crowded out. After World War II, the same industrial chemical plants that had been manufacturing ammonium nitrate for bombs and munitions suddenly had no war left to fight. They needed a new market, so they pivoted. They rebranded their explosive compounds, diluted them, and began selling them to farmers and home gardeners as synthetic plant food. Almost overnight, the entire agricultural conversation shifted from soil biology to soil chemistry, from working with living systems to replacing them with synthetic ones. The industry needed you to believe that fertility came from a bag, not from the ground. The worm got forgotten, not because the science was wrong, but because the science was inconvenient for people who needed to sell you something every single spring. And the cruelest irony of all is this, today. If you walk into any garden center in America and you want the magic of the worm, the industry will gladly sell it back to you. A single, small bag of so-called premium worm castings will cost you anywhere between $15 and $30. They took nature's free alchemy, packaged it in shiny plastic, and placed a premium price tag on it. They are charging you for something your soil could be producing on its own, endlessly, for free. We are going to stop paying that ransom today. What Darwin proved, and what the industry buried under a mountain of marketing, is exactly why that $2 pipe in my garden works. And the mechanism behind it is stranger and more precise than most people ever expect. Earthworms do not have eyes. They do not have ears. They have no limbs to speak of. But they possess something far more useful for what we are trying to accomplish, which is an extraordinarily sensitive chemical detection system built into every single centimeter of their moist, muscular skin. They sense the world almost entirely through moisture and chemical gradients in the soil. They are living chemical sensors, constantly scanning the underground environment for signals. And the one signal they are most powerfully drawn to, the scent that triggers an almost magnetic pull in their primitive nervous systems, is the smell of decomposing organic matter. When you drop a banana peel or a handful of spent coffee grounds into that PVC pipe, and you seal the lid tightly, the decomposition process begins almost immediately. Billions of microbes, invisible to the naked eye, swarm the material and begin breaking it down. As they work, they release specific volatile organic compounds into the surrounding soil through every single hole you have drilled into the sides of the pipe. Those compounds do not just sit there. They diffuse outward through the moisture in the soil like a slow, invisible broadcast signal, a chemical lighthouse beacon pulsing through the dark earth. And every earthworm within a surprisingly large radius receives that signal. Their chemoreceptors detect the gradient, and they begin moving toward it with directional accuracy that rivals a shark following a blood trail through the ocean. The pipe becomes an anchor point, a permanent feeding station, a beacon that pulls worms in from distances that can extend well beyond the physical boundaries of your raised garden bed. They enter through the drilled holes, navigating the narrow openings with ease. They feed inside the dark, moist chamber, consuming the softening organic matter. And then, they do something absolutely critical. They leave. This is the step that separates the worm pipe from a traditional compost bin. The worms do not stay trapped inside the chamber. They move back out through those same holes and travel through your entire root zone, burrowing new tunnels as they go. Each tunnel they create aerates the soil, allowing oxygen and water to penetrate deeper than any mechanical tiller could ever reach. And as they travel, they deposit their waste, which soil scientists call castings, in a continuous trail directly through the area where your plant roots are actively growing and searching for nutrients. You are not building a compost bin. You are building a worm highway with a permanent, all-you-can-eat rest stop in the middle, and the factory is already running underground. You just have not plugged it in yet. What the worms are leaving behind in your soil is something no fertilizer company wants you to examine too closely. Let us price it out right now so you understand the magnitude of what you are unlocking. Worm castings, the technical term for worm waste, sell for anywhere between $15 to $30 for a tiny 5-pound bag at most garden centers. If you have ever purchased a bag and read the label, you already know it is marketed as a premium, almost luxury soil amendment. But the price tag only tells half the story. The real question is why it commands that price. And the answer is something synthetic fertilizer fundamentally cannot replicate. Standard chemical fertilizers are built around three numbers you see printed on every bag: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the NPK ratio. They deliver those elements in a soluble, fast-release form that floods the soil, gives the plant a short burst of green growth, and then leaches away with the next heavy rainfall. The plant gets a spike, then it crashes, then it needs another hit. It is, by design, a dependency cycle. Worm castings work on an entirely different principle. The nutrients inside castings are bound within a slow-release biological matrix, which means they become available to plant roots gradually, in response to the plant's own uptake signals, rather than all at once in a flood that washes away. But beyond NPK, castings contain something no synthetic fertilizer has ever successfully bottled. They are dense with beneficial microbial life, including bacteria and fungi that form direct symbiotic relationships with plant root systems. They contain naturally occurring plant growth hormones, specifically auxins and cytokinins, that signal plants to accelerate root development and increase their resistance to drought and disease. They contain humic acids that physically improve soil structure, helping sandy soils retain precious moisture and compacted clay soils breathe again. A study published in the journal Applied Soil Ecology found that even small concentrations of worm castings mixed into growing media significantly outperformed synthetic fertilizer in both germination rates and early plant growth. The mechanism is not just nutrition, it is biological communication between the casting microbiome and the plant root system. And your pipe is generating this exact material right now, at no cost, deposited directly into the zone where your roots are hungriest. Now, let us build it. The materials are almost insultingly simple, which is part of why this system gets dismissed by people who have been conditioned to believe that effective gardening requires expensive equipment and complicated routines. You need one length of PVC pipe, ideally between 4 and 6 inches in diameter. You can also use a cheap plastic bucket with a lid if that is what you have available. The diameter matters because you want enough interior volume to hold a meaningful amount of organic waste without needing to feed it every single day, but not so large that the decomposition rate inside slows down from insufficient microbial density. For depth, you are aiming to bury the pipe so that roughly 18 to 24 inches sits below the soil surface, with about 4 inches remaining above ground as your loading port. In practical terms, for most home garden beds, a pipe or bucket between 18 and 24 inches long works perfectly. That puts the bottom of your chamber at a depth where soil moisture is more consistent and worm activity is naturally highest. Before you bury it, take a drill and cover the entire lower section of the pipe with 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch holes. Space them roughly 2 to 3 inches apart in a scattered pattern all the way around the circumference. You are building a door system. You want as many entry and exit points as possible, so the worms can move freely in every direction without obstruction. The more holes, the more traffic. The wider the distribution of castings through your garden bed. For the bottom of the pipe, you have 2 equally valid options. You can leave it completely open, which allows worms to enter from directly below and also lets liquid from decomposing material drain naturally into the surrounding soil, carrying soluble nutrients with it. Or you can cap it loosely with a piece of mesh or landscape fabric to prevent larger debris from clogging the base while still allowing easy worm passage. Both approaches work. The open bottom is slightly simpler and marginally more effective for unrestricted worm movement. Position the pipe as close to the center of your planting bed as your layout allows. The goal is to maximize the radius of influence so that worms traveling outward from the feeding chamber pass through the root zones of as many plants as possible before they stop and deposit their precious castings. Once it is in the ground and your cap is screwed on tightly, the physical infrastructure is complete. But how you feed this reactor determines everything about how well it will perform. This is where most people either get it right immediately or develop small, seemingly harmless habits that quietly undermine the entire system. Almost any raw kitchen waste goes in. Fruit and vegetable scraps, banana peels, apple cores, wilted salad greens, coffee grounds with the filter, used tea bags without the staple, crushed eggshells, cooked plain rice or pasta in small amounts, and torn up pieces of brown cardboard or newspaper to balance the moisture. These are the inputs that decompose at aerate worms can track and respond to, releasing those chemical signals through the soil consistently enough to keep your worm population anchored near the pipe. But here is the fatal warning. Do not, under any circumstances, drop meat, fish, dairy products, or cooked foods heavily coated in oils and sauces into this pipe. Those materials decompose through a completely different bacterial pathway that produces ammonia-based compounds in concentrations that are actively repellent and even toxic to earthworms. Worse, they will attract rats, raccoons, maggots, and scavengers that will dig up your garden trying to reach the source of the odor. Keep the inputs raw, clean, and plant-based. The system will regulate itself. And finally, the absolute golden rule of the trench pipe. It must have a tight-fitting cap. If you leave the top open, 3 disastrous things happen. First, heavy rain will flood the chamber and drown the worms that are working inside. Second, the sun will penetrate and dry out the organic matter, stopping decomposition dead in its tracks. And third, and perhaps most importantly, light will enter the pipe. Earthworms are photophobic. They are hardwired to avoid light. If there is any light visible inside the chamber, they simply will not enter. The cap seals the moisture, traps the heat, and maintains the absolute, primordial darkness required for the alchemy to take place. You will know the system is working within a few weeks. When you lift the cap and peer inside, you will see rich, black castings accumulating along the walls. The soil immediately surrounding the pipe will turn noticeably darker and more crumbly than the rest of the bed, and the plants closest to the reactor will begin outpacing everything else in your garden. Their leaves a deeper shade of green, their stems thicker, their fruits larger and more abundant. They will grow with a violent, almost unstoppable vigor that becomes difficult to explain to anyone who has not witnessed it firsthand. This is not a trick. This is not a gardening hack. This is biology, working exactly the way it has for 500 million years. Long before humans invented the plastic bottle and the marketing department. Every time you drop a handful of kitchen scraps into this pipe and seal the lid, you are doing something quietly subversive. You are taking $1 away from the ledger of the chemical conglomerates and placing it back into the ecosystem of your own backyard. You are proving that the earth provides everything we need, abundantly and endlessly, if we only set up the right conditions and then step back and let nature do the work it was always meant to do. This is the knowledge they spent a century trying to bury under a mountain of synthetic fertilizer bags and glossy advertisements. Because a gardener who understands the worm pipe is a gardener who never needs to buy their plastic bottles again. You become sovereign over your own soil. If you are ready to break free from the endless cycle of consumer gardening, if you are ready to stop being a customer and start becoming an alchemist of the underground, if you are ready to uncover the lost wisdom of the soil and turn your backyard into a self-sustaining sanctuary that feeds you year after year without asking for a dime in return, then you belong here. Hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, because this channel is dedicated to resurrecting the forbidden agricultural science that the industry buried. We are just scratching the surface of what the earth is hiding from us. In the the next video. I am going to show you a forgotten technique from the 1700s that pulls free electricity out of the very air you are breathing and channels it directly into the roots of your plants. And they really do not want you to know that one now. Go find a piece of scrap pipe, dig a hole, seal the cap, and let the underground empire go to work.